US forces in Afghanistan have secured and cleared the airfield at Kabul's international airport, allowing flights to resume in and out of the capital. It follows desperate scenes on the tarmac where people desperate to escape tried to clamber onto an overcrowded US military plane. In chaotic scenes, several even hung onto a plane as it took off. Some were sadly seen falling to their deaths.
But in his first public remarks since the fall of Afghanistan's Western-backed government, US President Joe Biden has staunchly defended the decision to withdraw US forces from the war-torn country. Greg Jennett is across the details from Washington and Jane Norman is in Canberra. Hello to both of you again. Well, Greg, the eyes of the world have been on Hamid Karzai International Airport in Kabul. Any idea when countries, including Australia, will be able to start using it again?
Morning, Lisa. Yes, this might sound like I'm about to give a logistics update, but let's face it, everything that's happening in Kabul at the moment is all about logistics. It's about airlifting and evacuating tens of thousands of Afghan citizens and nationals of other countries. Planes are trying to make their way there from across Europe and across the world. And that's why those distressing scenes of so many people pouring onto the tarmac yesterday, putting themselves beneath the nose cone of a C-17 Globemaster, underway, taxiing on the tarmac, and some clinging to the undercarriage, was so distressing. Later vision, which we wouldn't show you, also appeared to portray people falling from the aircraft after it had taken off. So that sets the scene of the problem that they confronted. There are now more than 3,000 US forces there at Hamid Karzai International Airport, and the Pentagon has held a briefing to tell us that operationally they feel they have had success. They are now back in charge of not only air traffic control, but the perimeter of the airfield. One C-17 with Marines on board was the first to land. And as of a half an hour ago, the Pentagon was expecting a second aircraft to land with members of the 82nd Airborne Division. So this is about building up and further surging the US troop numbers there at the airport. Now that it's secure, the hope is that they can really pick up the pace for their own evacuations, which are larger on scale than any other country, hoping to put up to 300 aboard the C-17s at any one time. There are other aircraft, not all military, some are contracted, and they do hope to hit a peak evacuation rate of up to 5,000 a day pretty quickly. But you are right, it's not just the US that we're talking about here. If they can get planes in and out, that will give encouragement to other countries too.
And we've been hearing from the US President Joe Biden as he's been spelling out the final mission for American troops after 20 years. What's his strategy?
It is to persevere and it is to wrap up. Joe Biden is not for altering course here. He locked in a decision back in April, and he has, after a few days of silence and retreat at Camp David, emerged to tell the people of America why he reached that decision, how he's somewhat surprised by the developments of the last 36 hours or so, but why he will not waver in trying to wrap up this US military commitment after 20 years. Let's take a listen to Joe Biden.
I stand squarely behind my decision. After 20 years, I've learned the hard way that there was never a good time to withdraw U.S. forces.
OK, so he'll still attract plenty of criticism and lots of head scratching as well. Criticism from political opponents here who think this has been an unmitigated disaster. But for their own part, the Biden administration will measure success on what happens in these final days after something that might euphemistically be called a setback in recent days.
Thanks, Greg. And Jane in Canberra, what does it all mean for the federal government's ambitions to try and get not only Australians out of Afghanistan, but Afghans who've helped the Australian Defence Forces over the years?
Yeah, well, Lisa, just to give an indication of how quickly this story is evolving this morning, the Defence Minister Peter Dutton spoke to the media only an hour ago, and at that stage he said the situation in Kabul was terrible, in his words. He said the situation is in flux and it was simply not yet safe enough for Australian military aircraft to land in Kabul to actually execute this mission, which is to evacuate Australian citizens and Afghan support staff who had worked alongside troops during the decades-long mission. The operation itself has been approved. We've got more than 250 troops on standby. 2 Hercules transport aircraft are ready to go to the Middle East to carry out this rescue mission. The question now is simply one of timing. We are getting a few more details about the kind of numbers of people the Australians are expecting to evacuate. We know that more than 130 Australian citizens remain in Afghanistan. They're journalists, they're working for non-government organisations, working for the United Nations. So they and their families, we understand, are being told to prepare for a flight as early as Wednesday. Then there's the other side, the humanitarian side of the equation, and that is the Afghan workers who supported Australia's mission and their families. Now, the Foreign Minister Marise Payne has said this morning the numbers are in the hundreds. So we're now expecting that hundreds of people will be evacuated from Afghanistan by Australian forces just as soon as they can actually land safely at the Kabul airport. And of course, the Australian side is listening carefully to those Pentagon briefings by their own counterparts to give some indication as to when they can actually give the green light for those troops and massive military aircraft to get to Afghanistan to carry out this evacuation mission. And there have been a lot of questions really here politically about why the government has left this evacuation mission so late, given, Lisa, that the last of Australia's diplomats and defence personnel left Afghanistan in June when our embassy there was shuttered.
Jane and Greg, thank you very much. And to give you an idea of just how desperate so many people are, this is the inside of a US C-17, what they call the Globemaster. 640 people. Afghan residents desperate to flee the Taliban. It was a flight from Kabul to Qatar. It was a US defence plane. The crew made the decision, even though it was overloaded, that it would take off and leave. Indication of the challenge ahead for all governments as they try to wade through this increasingly difficult situation in Afghanistan.